So, Jack, welcome to Etherton Events Saturday Showcase. Yeah, I know. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming into the gallery to talk about your work. And I guess the first thing I'd like to ask is, since this is such an uncertain time, a lot has changed in the last couple of weeks since we hung the show. What are you doing these days? How are you?
I'm fine, actually. Whenever I hang a show, the next couple of weeks is always kind of a, what am I doing now? Kind
Yeah.
of question mark. And so, but I'm used to being alone. So with coronavirus, kind of asking people to stay home and stuff, I'm very used to it. And
Okay.
so I'm just in my studio. I've pulled out some old canvases that never worked, and I'm trying to make them work right now. And I think what I often do, regardless of a show, is ask myself, what am I doing and why am I doing it? And having hung the show here, it's a great time to ask, what do I really want to be doing in the studio? It's time to pull out old ideas and come up with new ones. And if I'm not in the studio, then I try to be outside, ride my bike, jogging. The gyms are closed right now, but I'd be in the weight room, stuff like that.
Does that kind of inspire you or help you work out ideas when you're just out on your bike or?
Oh, all the time.
Yeah.
I never know where my ideas come from, but they just float in
Yeah.
from all over the place. And I often have a little notebook with me or something to write on, and then I keep track of different ideas. I don't do sketches normally, but I'll just describe something.
So is it sort of like a diary?
No,
No. Okay.
no, but I'll note the day, but it's not like, oh, it's today, I have to write something. It's just whenever something comes along.
Yeah.
And sometimes, I might see something, see somebody, see a truck go by with a sign on it. Anything can trigger some kind of new idea.
Do you ever carry around a camera, like a cell phone camera with you, or not
I
really?
have it right here. So
So you do?
I do. Oh, all the time. Actually, I'm going to get a photo of this.
That's
Okay.
unfair.
No, it's not. You're photographing me. Okay, I'm going to post this today.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Cell phones have been really revolutionizing what I take photos of, because I can put them on Instagram right away. But I didn't bring it with me today. I forgot, but I felt like, oh, I forgot my little Canon camera that I've had for years, and I almost never leave the house without it, because there's not always every day, but I never know when I'm going to see something really interesting. So,
And does that sort of go to the, back of your head as for use maybe in a later work or come out somehow later on?
oh yeah, it just depends. A lot of times I might be shooting signs in an alley, or yesterday was palm trees, or it could be my foot sticking up in front of this microphone here and looking at a visual connection, between blackness and mass and curves and stuff like that. It's just all sorts of weird stuff.
Well, let's say you go out on your bike, but let's take you back to your studio. So what's your studio like? What's your working environment? Could you sort of set the stage?
I work in a very small studio here in Tucson. It's the bedroom of our house, so it's like 10 by 10 feet. It's really insanely small, because I have a desk in there too, which is just crazy. And I have sort of an easel on one end of the room, and I can back out into the living room and look at it. And I have fluorescent lights above, and there's natural light. I like looking out the window, and my studio in Colorado, where I live most of the year, is a two-car garage that the car's never been in. So I've got, I've got a lot more room to do it, to work in Colorado. But I made the big painting here here in this
Here.
10 by 10
La
foot
Parade.
room, La Parade. So it was like, I'm like, I couldn't even get far enough away to photograph it after it was over, to get it into a
Yeah.
slide camera. So it's a very small space.
Do you like quiet when you work? Do you like music or noise or?
I like music
Yeah.
a lot. I listen to jazz a lot. I started listening to Pandora because it's not commercials. I used to listen to KXCI, but whenever my favorite music would come on, it's like their cue to start talking. And I have called them about it and said, you guys are ruining the best music because you think it's time to advertise. And I just like, anyway, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
You probably should cut that out.
So, we're turning over now to the show. How did you select the work for what you're showing in Go Figure?
I had the Tucson environment in mind for a long time. I've been coming here since 2003 every spring.
What brought you here?
I had a 1-year teaching job at the University of Arizona, teaching painting and figure drawing. And I rented a house near the Arizona Inn for that year from a faculty member who was going on sabbatical. And I did my 3 classes a semester. And spring was so nice here that we came back and rented a different house the next spring. And then after that, we bought this little house about a mile and a half from here. So we come down in January and leave in May.
Was there something in particular that you really liked about Tucson?
It's beautiful in the spring. Don't ask me about June, but
Yeah.
I'm a lightweight. I grew up in Chicago, and I'm used to heat and
Extreme heat.
humidity. But Tucson in February and March and April, you just can't beat it.
Yeah,
So,
it's stunning.
but the landscape's beautiful. I grew up in Chicago and went to school in Northern Illinois, and one of my friends in school came to grad school here in sculpture, and by the time he did that, I had moved to Los Angeles after my grad school, and I had a job as an art trucker, shipping art coast to coast, and so I would drive through Tucson and stop and see this friend of mine who he had a studio right off of 4th Avenue. And so I'd seen Tucson a lot already. And then it was like, when I was here teaching, it was the springtime just hooked me.
Yeah.
So it's beautiful.
I think
so going back to the show though, it's like, well, I've got these canvas, one piece that has cactus in it, and I've got these heads that are sprouting cactus that I call cactus heads. And, but I think, so those were kind of a natural works for the show. But then the extraordinary thing that happened a couple of years ago was with La Parade. I was in the, and so I wanted to make some work addressing the political situation here about the border wall and the Latino community in general. I was in the Arizona Biennial 2 years ago, and I had a piece in the show, and I came down to see it. And that weekend, I drove down to Nogales, and I walked across the border. I didn't have my passport, and I asked all these border guards, could I come back into the U.S. without a passport? And I got different stories. One guy said, well, I wouldn't do it. But then I asked, he was an ICE agent like 20 miles from Nogales in the middle of the road. But then I asked customs people right at the border building, and 2 different people told me, it was one guy, they were both outside the building, and I said, could I go into Nogales and come back without a passport? And the first guy I asked said, yeah, you'll be all right. And then just to make sure, I asked another employee, and she looks me in the eye and she's, technically no, but you'll be all right. You know,
Wow.
and so I went. And then I came back and I stood in line for 100 Mexicans for like an hour. And I get into the area where they look at your passports and stuff. Gave her my driver's license. She punched in the number. 10 seconds, she said, "You're good. Have a nice day."
Wow.
And I wrote an essay about this because I felt when I left, like, I've got the golden key. You know, it's U.S. citizenship, and they treat you like a king. Or I felt like I was just so, you know, like royalty, you know, and you've got all these other people waiting or wanting to get in. And I showed this essay to someone I met, a few people I met. It's on my website. And this one guy said, every time he crosses, he gets stopped for like an hour and a half, and just like, "Who are you? What are you doing?" Stuff like that. And I forget his details, but anyway, that's what that painting is about. And it's got a very brief English rendition of what I just told you, and then a translation in Spanish. And I had wanted to, there's a bigger version of the painting with also with one boxer, and this painting has two boxers. And that first version is in the show I just had in New York. And I wanted to show it here. And I thought, well, immigration's a big issue in New York too, so I sent it to the show in New York. But when I got down here, I said, I'm going to do another one. And so I did it. And it just took a couple weeks to do it in my little tiny space here.
So that's a pretty recent work then.
Last month.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can
And then the other big painting with the border monument, the obelisk, is there's obelisks between Tijuana and the Gulf of Mexico, and the Rio Grande, marking the border. And so that's my rendition of an obelisk that has kind of like skewered people like a barbecue.
Yikes.
So, I've always been interested in maps and arcane artificial lines on territory.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that comes across in the paintings when I've got all these notations and numbers and dates and stuff like that. The paintings become kind of a diary, not specifically a diary, but if something's going on a specific day, you know, I might have this little story there about something that happened, and I might date it, and then so it's the whole body of work takes on a diaristic narrative, kind of, without a intentional structure. It's just kind of there. And so I think of that when I think of the border monuments and fences and all the politics that are going on right now.
So you think of, it's the text that kind of provides, is it the text and the image together that kind of provide that diaristic quality? Because it's a feature of your work.
Very much so. People ask me usually what comes first, and the answer is an image could come first, or a story could come first, or they can both come together. And a lot of times, when I had the truck driving job, I didn't have time to paint at night. I tried it. I, had paints along, would try to work in Motel 6 at night, and I was just usually too tired. So I would start, what I started to do was write descriptions about places I was driving through on index cards that I'd keep in my pocket, and then I'd write when I was having dinner or something. So I got in the habit of writing little paragraph stories way back when, and I still do it these days, and it's like, I want to write this story, and then I'm going to need an image, for this or that. But then other times, other paintings are just complete visual responses to stuff.
One of the things that I was curious about was the use of numbers or the numbering in your paintings. I don't know if there's a system or a particular meaning that you assign to them.
For the hell of it, I started numbering stuff in 2002. And I started with number 2. And everything that I've worked on since then has gotten a number. I don't number photographs, but I number drawings and paintings. And I guess I'm up to 1800. So that's 18 years ago, about 100 pieces a year.
But you don't
and
number...
about half of them or more are actually drawings. So.
But you don't number them like many people would give them an inventory number and you wouldn't see it in the painted image, but you include them. And sometimes there's more than one number.
They are inventory numbers. And it makes it super easy for people like you at the gallery to say, do you have number so-and-so? And then give me the title, and then I could look it up. And sometimes when my website's gotten so unmanageable, I Google myself and the title and the number, and it just comes right up. But I like the visual look. I've always liked advertising. I've always liked the old photographs with the descriptions underneath that are just written on the glass plate. I'm trying to think of all the people in art history, but back in the 1700s,
yeah,
1800s.
Those were the government survey photographers.
Yeah, I've always liked that look, and so I put them where they're visual on the paintings. I started with number 2. And sometimes it takes a long time to resolve a painting. And so if it's number 30 and then I come back to it a year from now, I'll put a new number on it in its current position, like number 120. And then if it still isn't finished, 2 years from now, maybe it'll get a third number. And I think I have one painting that's got at least 5 numbers on it before it was finally over. And then I get fascinated with Japanese prints, with all the sensor seals and everything. I can't understand it, but it looks so great, up in the corner with the squirt, with the text and stuff. So it's just something I like. But then there's a few holes in the numbering system, and so I thought I'm going to give art historians something to argue about. So. But I like it.
I like that nice job.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to ask you about was the use of your models. How do you find them? What's the significance?
When I started painting back in high school in the 70s, I was drawn to landscape for a long time. And then that sort of migrated to painting objects, airplanes, other stationary things. And, but I've always been, and I always never was really interested in painting the figure until I started teaching the drawing class here at the U of A. And all of a sudden I had the confidence to really start painting the figure. The guys that I paint the most frequently, I would say they're my muse. I look at these young guys from the gym, and I'm always visually impressed by these students who are like stem cells. They're at a time in life when they're planning to go off in all these different directions and become this and that and the other. But part of why I'm doing this is I became aware my whole life of the great tide of images of women in art and in lots of segments of our society. And I have always wanted to paint. I've always wanted to see men. And yet men you see are, they are sports heroes and military action figures, but I wanted to see guys in more normal circumstances. And so part of me has always been wanting to offer these images to kind of even the score a little bit. But I feel like it's political at the same time, because it's not necessarily, I just want, it's my interest in being visible too. You know, I want these guys to be visible. Um, I'm gay, so I like looking at them, and I can't tell you enough how they inspire a lot of different images, and so I paint them because I feel like, well, this is what I want to paint. But my goal has always been to make the images interesting because we are just bombarded with so many images, especially these days with the internet and Instagram and Facebook and you name it, and TV and whatever, that my goal is to make an image that you look at from across the room and say, I want to go look at that. What is going on there? And so that's always been my criterion: is it an interesting image? And I'm using these guys as they're my actors. You know, I assign them these roles, and I put them to work, and then they take it from there. I find them usually either at the University Rec Center here, mm-hmm. or in Colorado in Boulder at the Rec Center. And one time I asked a guy, he was in the next booth at a restaurant. I stop other people on the street, you know, and it's like the reactions can be a little varied.
Yeah, they must be startled.
I preface it and I say, I have a question for you, and it's an unusual question. And then I go into my shtick about, I'm a painter, I take photos of people, I hire people to photograph for an hour, and then I paint from them. I pay X number of dollars per hour. Would that be in your ballpark of interest? And there's enough people who say, yeah, sure, the money interests them. It's not a lot, but still, it's more than they make, you know, delivering cookies at night or something.
Have you ever gotten some kind of far out answers, or have people ever reacted in a way that made you concerned?
Oh, no.
Yeah.
They just ignore me. You know, very few people will say, no, I'm not interested. Most will say, let me think about it. These days I give them a website card. They could look at it and then decide and get back to me. And if they don't have an interest, they don't pursue it. Mm-hmm. I might follow up, and then they'll explicitly say yes or no. And sometimes people are just too busy, and so I'll ask them next time I see them, and then it happens. But I started photographing in 1995. So what's really interesting is when I started they've always been in a very tight age range. So
what's the age range roughly?
The early 20s.
Okay.
20 to 25, somewhere in there. Sometimes, 18 or 19. But it's funny that the first guys that I photographed are now in their 40s. You know, it's like, and I haven't seen them. You know, some guys are more interested than others to see what I've done with the images. Some guys are really interested. You know, they'll buy copies of books that the paintings or photos have been published in. You know, one guy bought copies for his mother and his girlfriend, and so it runs the gamut.
Yeah.
So, but I think they're usually flattered that somebody's interested in portraying them, and I hope that the general audience, finds them interesting enough to look at the paintings.
I think the other thing I was curious to know is, did you have any mentors? Are there any particular people who influenced your work?
I think the list goes on from here to the river. I think anybody is influenced by a lot of people. The people that stand out to me, the earliest ones, actually, was really interested in Norman Rockwell back when I was in high school, and Andrew Wyeth. I would say Andrew Wyeth, and then Vincent van Gogh. I think of Van Gogh just for his dedication to his work. I think Wyeth always spoke to me about his what he was painting in Pennsylvania and Maine. But I look at these days, there's lots of other people that I love looking at their work. I think,
Whose work do you like looking at?
I'm just trying to think of the books that I've got. I just bought a Francesco Clementi book this spring. I really enjoy Neil Rauch. I've learned a lot of interesting things about juxtaposing abstraction with representation in his work. I like a lot of the new figurative painters who've been getting some attention these days.
Could you name a couple of
H.C.
people?
Westerman has always been a favorite, but I like comic books too. Dick Tracy and Archie and Batman and Superman. I have books on advertising and book covers. Photography has always been a huge influence. I mean, I'm a photographer as well, but I just haven't tried showing anything in 1,000 years.
Well, that's a pretty comprehensive list right there.
Yeah, it's really all over the place. But the thing that I love to do in the morning and in the evening, morning when I'm having coffee and in the evening when I'm having a beer, is I will flip through art magazines, and I look at I read articles, I look at the advertising, I look at the sequence of advertising and the sequence of imagery and information and how different magazines structure what they're out there selling. And then just for a reality check, I'll look at Sports Illustrated or something, just because the focus is so different. And but I think my goal is like to just create a free-floating, receptive space in my head where anything could interest me. From these Mark Clout
Yes,
photographs.
they are. Who, by the way?
Yeah, writes on
Writes, yeah.
So I could be looking at his work, thinking of him rephotographing the West, or I could be looking at the shape of Monument Valley, the left mitten or the right mitten, and how it might fit into these chairs that you're sitting in, et cetera, et cetera. And so it can just go off in so many different directions.
Well, you mentioned looking at magazines and books, and that's maybe a good segue. You've published a few books. You have a very active website, and I know you're also active. So I was just wondering, is there anything you'd like to mention about your books or your website while we're here?
It's jackbalas.com. Really simple. There's no advertising on it. Nothing will twirl and flash at you. There's no ads that move in from the right-hand side. I do try to keep it up to date. I'm on Instagram and Facebook with works in progress that I never put on my website. And on social media, I'm also once in a while posting, the sunset or patterns of shadows on the sidewalk or interesting stuff out there in the world that you'll never get on the website. The books that I've published are all catalogs, and I've tried to be really thorough because my work goes way back. And there's one book I put together called Guidebook, and it's spelled GUY''D. So I'm also interested in puns and the use of language and stuff like that. So
if somebody wanted to buy one of your books, how would they do that?
they're all on Blurb,
Okay.
so very easy to find. Yeah.
Well, thanks so much, Jack, for coming
You're welcome.
in. It's really interesting to hear about your work and how comprehensive It is. How many things go into making it, and the way you think about it, and the things you draw on, I think, are fascinating. So
Well, you're welcome. It's a real treat to show here at Etherton. I've been coming in here for 20 years now, and it's nice to have the show up on the wall. I wish the circumstances right now
yeah,
with the virus thing would just go away. We'll find the cure yesterday, and I hope everybody can still come in and check it out. So
well, thanks.
it looks great. The show looks great.
Thanks. Stay well.
Okay, hope to.